Welcome to the Center for High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. Today we'll be launching the 2025 High Impact Giving Toolkit. This event will be a conversation between CHIP's founding executive director, Kat Rosqueta, and Tony Bowen. Tony is the executive director of the Fidelity Charitable Catalyst Fund, where he partners with the Fidelity Charitable Board of Trustees to manage a grant-making program dedicated to building bridges between donors and promising nonprofits. The Catalyst Fund makes grants to intermediaries like CHIP that engage donors, elevate nonprofits, and conduct research on donors and philanthropy.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Kat. So super excited for our conversation. We're going to have some time for Q&A at the end if folks want to put any questions into the Q&A. But I'm going to start asking you questions, Kat. So you've been publishing the toolkit for nearly a decade, but in 2025, you added some new features. You mentioned a little bit about the emerging topics. I'm curious, why did you decide to add this section, and how did you choose those three topics?
Yeah, so as the toolkit has evolved, and frankly, it started out a decade ago as just a list of nonprofits that emerged from our applied research. We started thinking of it as really something that could be useful to all donors, no matter what cause or community they care about. And the three emerging topics we chose, we found were becoming more and more relevant to individual donors and institutional grant makers alike. And I mean, there are lots of those kinds of issues, but these three in particular, we had access to both practitioners, funders, and academic experts who really understood the role they were playing in society and how philanthropy could help. And so that allowed us to pick up these three topics and provide guidance that we hope is both informed by the best available evidence and really actionable. I mean, this needed to be something that was practically useful to the folks using the toolkit.
Great. Yeah, as a funder in this space, I get asked this question all the time. What trends am I seeing? So I'm really glad that you all decided to cover them this year. So let's dive into each one a little bit more closely so that listeners can get a little bit of an insight into what you covered in the toolkit. So let's start with collective giving. Collective giving has been around for centuries, and yet you featured it as an emerging topic. So why did you do that?
So, yeah, I mean, like centuries, this is not new at all as an idea, but one of the reasons we included it is because of the demonstrated growth that I mentioned earlier on. And growth, not just among individuals, but some corporate philanthropy is using it as a way to invest in the communities they work in. Governments are starting to use it. And it's because a lot of people are viewing it as a way to counteract what folks view as a kind of top-down nature of a lot of philanthropy. The power of collective giving is that it is a group of individuals who are collectively not just giving money together, but also learning and sharing perspectives and experience. And so it counteracts that top-down nature, but it's also a way to have individuals who can sometimes feel like, I only have $100, right? How can I help compared to, a major staffed foundation that's giving millions or in some cases even billions. So it's a way to have all those individuals kind of flex their priorities and their money more than they would if they just did it alone. And a lot of people are concerned about wealth disparities and the consolidation where, more and more of individual giving is being made by the wealthiest among us. And this is a way for those who aren't as affluent to still make a difference and learn. And I think also it's a way, because these are individuals in communities, they are bringing up different issues than what the big institutional grant makers and professional folks are doing. So I think it is a fantastic development in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually in 4 different collective giving efforts personally.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
and so I love that this was featured. And even though I'm a professional grant maker, I still think it's important personally to get involved. For instance, I support the Equality Fund, which funds LGBT groups throughout Boston. I can't pick just one group to fund, so I love that I can give my money to a central organization that regrants that out to other local nonprofits.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of how it can be added to anybody's philanthropic portfolio of activity, even to a professional. I also can't help but think that the timing of it is good. You know, the whole world has survived a pandemic that had us so isolated, right? And it's just also a way that people are reconnecting with, with each other, with their neighbors, and with others in their community.
Yeah, there was a new report that came out that you all featured in the toolkit called In Abundance that Philanthropy
Yes.
Together helped work on with the Johnson Center. And they actually are able to document that people are more civically involved when they're in a giving circle. They're healthier, right? They're actually healthier when you're involved in a giving circle, and you do more giving, which we all love to see. So.
Yep.
So one of the other topics that you covered is civic news and information, as you mentioned. You all first flagged this in the We the People, How Philanthropy Can Strengthen Democracy effort that you and I got to work on together. But in the toolkit, you describe civic news and information as relevant to any cause that a donor might care about. So why do you think that funders should consider civic news and information funding as a tool to help what they care about?
Yeah, so one way to think of philanthropy is that it goes to where our social problems are, and there is a major social issue that's tied to just the restructuring of a large sector, which is the sector that provides news and information in the media sector. That has been disrupted in a way that's now resulted in literally thousands upon thousands of local news outlets around the world have closed.
Yeah.
So that means individuals and communities all around the world have no reliable source of the news and information that literally affects their daily lives. And what does that do? That leaves people much more vulnerable to misinformation. It leaves them in the dark. It means that there's no shared understanding of what's going on, there's no shared understanding of what some of the bright spots are. Like there are real world solutions that people are doing in their communities, but when you don't have anybody who cares about the reporting, you don't even know about it. And so that's why, because that has to do with like the restructuring of a whole sector that's both for profits and nonprofits, philanthropy is actually playing a great role in improving access to news and civic information and pioneering new models of news that can fill that gap. And what we found when individuals have access to timely, reliable, trusted news information, it mobilizes them, right? They start understanding what's going on in their communities. They have a shared, because of a shared understanding, they can mobilize collectively to make good things happen, right? And so we're still a long way from replacing those thousands of news outlets, but if you think of philanthropy as sort of society's R&D, it is playing a really critical role at fixing what people call the news deserts.
Absolutely. Great. So let's go into the third topic area. So guaranteed income, it's a very hot topic right now. I think
It
at
is,
most
yeah.
conferences I go to, or when I open up a publication, someone's talking about it. So can you share a little bit about what funders should know about the research that's come out on guaranteed income and how they could get started if it's of interest to them?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny, right? What is guaranteed income? It's cash to people who need it.
Yep.
It is the simplest concept. But what's happened is there have been more and more pilots, and these pilots have been conducted in cities. Like the city of Stockton is one of the biggest sort of pilots where a municipality actually tested it. You can even think of some of the programs that helped us survive COVID as a form of government funded, guaranteed income. And so what's happened over the past, 7, 8 years is that the evidence of how effective it is just keeps mounting. And so we now have evidence of guaranteed incomes, its strength in reducing child poverty, its strength in reducing disease, like tuberculosis outside the US. There have been so many ways in which guaranteed income have led to the good outcomes that all sorts of funders are focused on. So it's a tool, right? It's not a cause per se. It's a tool that can be integrated into a lot of people's philanthropic activities because frankly, a lot of the need results from the lack of financial resources to make the kinds of decisions individuals and families want to make in order for them to thrive. And that's another aspect of it. Not only do we have all this great evidence about how it works, but it's sort of it's almost like a logic thing, like the individuals experiencing that need without guaranteed income are making really painful trade-offs between getting their medicine or keeping a doctor's appointment, and maybe not being able to keep that doctor's appointment because they literally don't have the money for a bus, a train, or an Uber. Guaranteed income minimizes those trade-offs. And that means they decide what's going to be best for themselves and their family. And then we see the evidence that all these good outcomes start flowing.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah, I love that for all three of these, no matter what causes are most important to you, there's a way for you to plug in. Because the outcomes that you're looking for, the way that you're trying to do giving can all be tied to these. So that's terrific. Yeah, if you haven't seen more on guaranteed income publicly, you certainly will in the next couple of years. So let's pivot from the emerging topics to one of the other key parts that you featured, which is the 4 philanthropic plays that a funder can make. And they're a core element of the toolkit. They were in there last year, but you had a few additions to how they're framed with some examples, risks, and some trade-offs. So how do you think a donor should think about the 4 plays and use them to apply them to their giving?
Yeah. So the 4 plays came out of some of our earliest work, right when the center was starting. But we really learned how helpful it could be when we started our High Impact Philanthropy Academy. So that is a cohort-based executive education program where a combination of individual donors and professional grant makers learn how to practice high impact philanthropy. And when we got those folks in a group, what we realized is that some people had almost been trained to think that there's really the best strategy for philanthropy. And other people just never even considered ways that we know lead to impact. So part of what we recognize is not everybody appreciates the high-level strategies that philanthropy has always backed, and that all of them, all 4 of them, can be paths to impact. It's just you have to be honest with yourself as a funder, what trade-offs you're willing to make. And so the 4 philanthropic plays are funding direct services, right? An example of that would be there is a family in your community that does not know where their next meal is going to come from. Providing them food, that's a direct service. Tutoring to a child who's falling behind in math, that's a direct service. Another play is what we refer to as system change or system capacity building. So if you think of an issue like housing, right? There are lots of different players that affect the availability of affordable housing. Some of them are nonprofit, some of them are for-profit. You've got developers, you've got landlords. That's a system. And so another way philanthropy helps is improving that system, building the capacity of all those different players to achieve a social goal, like people have access to housing they can afford. A third is policy and advocacy. So an example of that might be something like, for a very long time, and still in many places, your insurance won't reimburse mental health treatment and prevention in the same way it will physical health, right? That requires a policy change. And then finally, I mentioned this earlier on, philanthropy as society's R&D. I mean, sometimes philanthropy backs those things that can be truly game changing. And you often think of this in health, right? A vaccine, for example. All of those are valid paths to impact. It's just you have trade-offs, right? So some people will say, but direct services doesn't change the underlying conditions that led to the need. That is correct. But you can have confidence that somebody is better off today, right? There's a concreteness and a confidence there, and it's more short term. You can see results. Contrast that to something that's really innovation. You could spend, like the Gates Foundation has in malaria vaccines, decades and billions of dollars, and the only results you have until recently is knowing what doesn't work. So the reason we have these four plays is we're not saying one is better than the other. They all have a role, but I mean, funders have to be honest around at this point in time, what trade-offs are you willing to stomach? And people change, throughout their philanthropic path. Sometimes they will focus on one place. Sometimes they'll focus on all four. We're not saying it's more recognize the decisions you have and choose the one that makes sense at that time.
Right. Yeah, I love that it adds to the conversation because we often, when we're thinking about philanthropy strategy or as a donor, how do you want to make a difference? We think about who do you want to affect? What causes do you want to affect? And then this lets us answer the how question, right? How do we want to go about carrying that? It's sort of a nice 201 level as you're starting to think through your own philanthropic approach to being a proactive giver or a proactive funder. Great. Thanks for walking through those. I love the framework. I also love that it helps us feel less guilty or judged for picking a particular area, right?
Yes.
Because, philanthropy, there's a lot of heart involved in philanthropy. There's head too, and Chip likes to balance both of those. But I feel like it lets us talk about this in a way that aligns best with the difference we're trying to make.
I love that you bring that up, Tony, because that's exactly what we found in the academy. It was sort of confusing to us. Everybody who goes to the academy is serious about having impact with their philanthropy. This is a wonderful self-selecting crowd. And to have them sort of criticize different strategies that we all know lead to impact, it's sort of, no, you guys, you're all on the same team, and you don't have to feel guilty about not choosing the other strategy. Just know it sort of goes back to our conversation around collective giving. It's about collectively, can you make a bigger difference? So yeah, no more guilt if you're intentionally and sincerely trying to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. And you don't need to plug the academy. I will. I'm actually going through the spring academy, and I'm super excited. And so I know that there still are some slots left for those that want to dive a little bit deeper. And so hopefully there's some more folks who will sign up. So let's talk about the exemplars. You showed the list of them at the beginning of today's webinar. There's something that the readers look forward to, as you mentioned, it's always been a core part of what you do. So can you dive a little bit deeper into perhaps three, maybe a local example, a national example, and someone that works more globally, just so that folks get a taste of who you're going to be covering in the toolkit?
Sure. I actually have the guide in front of me, and it's like, oh, I want to talk about all of them.
All of them, yes.
I know. But let me, this is the teaser so that folks will look at all of them. And just to be clear, the exemplars in and of themselves, they are all great organizations to support, but they're not like a top 10 list per se. We really choose them because what they're doing represents a model that can be used elsewhere. And so in addition to describing a particular nonprofit, we talk about the lessons learned. We talk about how you can find organizations like this one. But let me give you the, 3 quick examples of the ones you mentioned. So, okay, so one of them is Build Up Community School. That is a pilot, meaning it's working in one site, and it's addressing 2 needs that communities and people have. One is the fact that in the United States, uh, training for a trade, so a trade, in construction or plumbing or as an electrician can be a wonderful path to a secure financial situation for you and your family, like up to a 6-figure salary and with far less debt than a 4-year college or university. And yet we have a lack of skilled tradespeople, and we have many people who don't have that career path and who are actually living in communities that have not been invested in for lack of financial resources. So what Build Up Community School is, it's a small nonprofit workforce development school in Birmingham, Alabama. It's 6-year career-focused curriculum where those young people learn a trade, a trade that can lead to a path to a career, a livelihood. They rehab homes in their community. And now all of a sudden um, you have jobs, good jobs, and you reduce blight. And you have a set of young people who recognize that they can and are making a difference and improving the lives of not just themselves, but their neighbors and the community they grew up in, right? So that's a nice local example. Again, it's a model of what can be done elsewhere. And maybe I'll go to the other extreme, which is global. Um, you know, uh, Last year there were an estimated almost half a billion, 500 excuse me, half a million estimated intentional homicides. So we're not talking about war and conflict, intentional homicides. Cure Violence is a nonprofit that works in about 26 US cities and 18 countries around the world. And it was started by an epidemiologist that recognized violence in many ways acts like an epidemic in that it spreads. And so a way to curtail violence, just like with an infectious disease, is to prevent the spread. And so what Cure Violence does in all these communities around the world is it has staff with similar life experience to the people who are most likely to be engaged in violence. So there's, and it's usually around the world, it is usually young men of a certain age. And, we can talk about sort of developmentally why they might be at higher risk to be engaged in violence. It has staff, it trains community members to understand where that violence might be occurring and intervenes to bring the temperature down before that violence turns deadly, before people start doing revenge killings, right? And as a result, it has been studied and around the world in some of the hottest spots for violence, we have seen reductions and a change of behavior. And that change in behavior can then become almost generational, right? So one, Birmingham, Alabama in the United States, focus on livelihoods, jobs, and blight and housing, and the other, violence around the world and how to keep it from happening, and particularly keep it from becoming deadly. So those are 2 of many fabulous examples in this section.
Great. Yeah, no, and I love that you're able to cover nonprofits that cover a lot of different topic areas. So there's something for everyone in there to learn from. And that you take this approach of just asking sort of, yeah, what evidence do you have that your program and your offering is effective? And that you understand the nuances that you can be a local nonprofit and still have some early evidence of success. And that you don't need to spend millions and millions of dollars to do an evaluation. So I love the breadth of organizations that get covered.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, again, we keep learning as we go with the toolkit. And this year we actually labeled some of the exemplars as pilots. Because what we found sometimes is people didn't always right size their expectations around evidence to the size or the developmental stage or the age of an organization, right? You should expect a high level of empirical evidence for an organization that's been working around the world for decades, right? You expect something different from that type of organization than you would from a pilot in one community. And we felt like if we didn't label them, like label the pilot, sometimes people were expecting way too much in terms of information and evidence and sort of capacity from a very valuable grassroots organization. They were sort of expecting from a new grassroots organization the same information and evidence as something that is working in multiple countries with even government support and lots of systems and outside evaluations already. So it was we wanted to present all, like you said, and we wanted to make sure people were being realistic with what they expected from each.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we saw last year with our own grantees that it was the organizations that had been around for 10 years or more that were able to tell the most compelling evidence story. But that's not to say that the new organizations didn't have some evidence that they had built along the way. And some of them, what I love is they get to do it from the ground up, as opposed to waiting 5 to 10 years to add in more evidence, building questions into their work. So yeah, I think that I love that you labeled them specifically so we can all right size our expectations based on an organization's life cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So we talked a little bit about how evidence is a piece of things that you're looking for, but you have organizational partners, as you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that help you vet organizations, which is really helpful. So how do you work with those organizations, and why did you expand to some new organizations this year?
Yeah, so this is an evolution in how our team works. Early on, like I said, the toolkit really was just we would learn about great nonprofits doing our applied research, and we thought to ourselves, hey, we should let other people know about them. That was the origin of the toolkit. Fast forward, and there are funders like the ones who are our institutional partners who are focused on particular geographies and who year round are scanning for great organizations. They're doing deep due diligence. They're not only analyzing the kind of programmatic practice, they're also getting to know the teams that lead these organizations. And and they need to because they're funders. They have limited resources and they want to understand how they can make the biggest difference. So, all of these partners are ones who give us their due diligence and talk to us about what they know. And that's how, we still independently vet them, but we are so grateful for all the work their staff does because that is what has freed us up to think about the other components of the toolkit. And that is what's given us confidence in presenting these as exemplars because we are building off of the due diligence of the institutional partners that we mentioned earlier. Now, two of them are longstanding institutional partners, Lippman Family Prize and the Greenlight Fund. Our center and our team have been engaged with those two organizations for a very long time. We train every year. We train the Lippman Family Prize Fellows who are competitively chosen here at the university and decide who the finalists are for that prize. So we had great confidence in the quality of due diligence we got from them. And they were nicely complimentary. Greenlight focuses on now 14 cities around the United States. Most of the applicants and the winners of the Lippman Family Prize are working outside the United States. So together, they've been great.
Great.
But there were issues that were coming up that
Mm,
donors cared about that they were not looking at or looking at as deeply as we thought would be helpful for us to present. And that's when we looked at Ivory Innovations and partnered with the Mitchell Foundation, who respectively were working on housing and environmental issues, two issues that are of concern to a lot of funders. And so they really expanded the source of exemplars we could choose from this year and helped us make sure that this set of exemplars were addressing concerns that we knew just a lot of individual donors and professional grant makers had.
I love the humility there, that willingness to work with other folks. And I will just say, as someone who does this full time, funders love it when individual donors or other funders come and ask us for, like, can you help us learn about an issue and tell us about some nonprofits that you've met over the years that you really like. And I can guarantee that 95% of us will take you out to coffee, we'll spend time with you, we'll help you vet nonprofits. We love it because it helps the whole system. And we do this because we love connecting nonprofits with the resources that they need to succeed. And at Democracy Fund, we had a whole program that was just devoted to helping donors learn about democracy. So if you're a donor that's new to a cause area, or a new program staff member at a foundation, please reach out to funders that work in the areas that you care about. Would love to meet with you.
Tony, I'm so glad you said that, and I love that you mentioned the system because our experience has been exactly what you described. Funders are happy to share what they know and learn and the connections they have. And then if you think about it from the point of view of the nonprofits, none of those nonprofits had to provide us the same due diligence they'd already provided, right? In fact, we take very good care to frankly get as much as we can out of our institutional partners to limit additional asks of the nonprofits. We want those nonprofits focused on their mission. So not only does it help individual donors, it helps the system of nonprofit organizations by making this all more efficient, right? And letting saving some time of nonprofits instead of answering yet another question of a potential donor, use the answers they've already given, right? And let them do the work we want them to do.
Love it. Yeah. So I'm going to move into my last question that I have today for you. And so listeners, if you have any questions based on today's webinar, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. So yeah, my last question is about how folks can take action. And so can you share an example or two of how a donor has used the toolkit in the past few years to help inspire folks that are opening up the toolkit today?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'm thinking of one family, um, 3 kids, and today marks the official public launch of the toolkit, but we actually share a sneak peek to the members of our listserv in December. We want to emphasize this is about looking at a year of impact, but a lot of people at the end of the year, it's sort of the season of giving. They will often make charitable gifts, and so that's why we provided to our listserv then. And this one family, when the kids were still in high school, or I guess junior high and high school, they would get the toolkit and the parents would say, like, you get to choose where our family's going to make a donation. Look at the toolkit and individually figure out what you want to give to, and then we need to have a conversation. And what I love about how that family did it is that, you think about it, they are building a family tradition of thoughtful philanthropy fairly early on. What was fun, I was talking to the mom, what was fun for the mom is that she could not have anticipated what her 3 children were interested in. So, and I have teenage kids. They don't always talk to you that much about what's on their mind. And so this was actually, they had this really rich conversation. It turned out each child was drawn to very different things. And so they had a whole conversation about the why. Why was it? And so, that's they wound up, I think, and they do this now every year. I don't know if they come to consensus or they decide to divvy up the budget for philanthropy, but that's a way a family I know has used it. We know another family where the daughter for her bat mitzvah chose from among the exemplars as where she wanted her gifts to go to. But it's really meant for anybody. And we've also had professional grant makers who are responsible for particular program areas, have told us that they have learned about a nonprofit that's relevant to their program area. For example, a program officer who focuses on early childhood learned of a specific nonprofit that happened to fit the grant making area that this person oversees. And we've had other professional grant makers say that they have considered exploring a strategy that they were less familiar with because they learned about it in the toolkit. So those are some ways that we know people have used it.
Great. Great examples. And yeah, we post the toolkit on the Fidelity Charitable website for all of our donors and the public to access. Love that you're able to make the toolkit free and accessible for everyone. And we know that our donors just love perusing through it every year. So excited to see what comes of it this year. So
that's a big thanks to your support, as the platinum sponsor. I mean, your commitment to making sure donors have what they need to make the decisions to advance impact is how we can do this.
absolutely. So in terms of questions that I can see, I might start personally with the first one, and then I'll see what you want to add to it. Kat, you've been talking plenty. So our first question is, can you recommend books, magazines, e-newsletters that can help to keep us up to date and informed? So I love this question. I can start with a couple of examples.
Yeah.
So one would be a site that's called Giving Compass. And Giving Compass, no matter what cause area you care about, lets you see the latest articles, events, volunteer opportunities, and nonprofits that you can support. They do a great Friday newsletter that sort of wraps up everything that's been going on in the sector that you can learn about. For those of you who have been getting into using AI, they even have a new chat bot where you can ask it questions. You could say, tell me more about what's happening in climate change these days. Tell me about 5 nonprofits in San Antonio I can support today. So they have that chat bot too. So Giving Compass. I'm a big fan of the Giving Done Right podcast that the Center for Effective Philanthropy puts on. It's designed to keep donors and funders up to date on trends, speakers. They're just wrapping up their season 4 right now. And there actually were a good number of references to the topics we talked about today in this season. So I love that. And then perhaps I would suggest, if you really want to geek out like we do as professionals, the Chronicle on Philanthropy is one of the best sort of ways to keep up to date on what's happening in the nonprofit sector. So those are 3: Giving Compass, Giving Done Right, and Chronicle on Philanthropy. What would you add, Kat?
Yep. Love it. Those are fantastic. So big ditto on all, +1. Some other publications maybe to consider would be Alliance Magazine, which looks broadly and internationally at philanthropy, Stanford Social Innovation Review, SSIR. And with all of these, in addition to going to their sites and potentially subscribing, I would recommend following them on social media, because that's a way sort of like ongoing you can get relevant news and information. And I think Tony and I both focus broadly because we know we have a wide diversity of people on things that can help you understand philanthropy broadly and the role it can play. In any given cause that you're interested in, there are communities, publications, nonprofits that can help you get up to speed on that cause. And many of those are actually in the toolkit and on our website, so you can access those for free.
Yeah, if there's a cause area you care about, say it's the arts, there are often affinity groups that you can join just for those groups.
Yep.
Great. So some of the other questions that came in are about, are you covering XYZ cause area or topic? And so just curious if CHIPS put out resources, understanding that it's hard. There's so many. I think if you look through the taxonomy of nonprofit topic areas, there's probably 1,500 that they're in the official list. But yeah, just curious if you've put anything out on financial literacy, impact investing, or thinking through the tax incentives for charitable contributions.
Okay. So our focus at the center is the role philanthropy plays in addressing social impact, social change. So our team doesn't focus on some of the related issues in terms of the transaction of philanthropy, like tax incentives. So I'll sort of have to put that aside because that's really it comes up in the academy sometimes, but it is not where we're focused. We're focused on how does philanthropy make the world a better place as defined as like improving lives in all these various ways that we've been talking about. That said, so tax is sort of more narrow, and as we know, tax regimes around the world are different. And even in the United States, there are all sorts of like potential policy changes around taxing charitable organizations. Can't help you so much there, although we know folks who can. If that is of real interest, we can probably connect you. Impact investing, on the other hand, is something that we look at and teach because it's the same goal, meaning how can you use private wealth in the service of the public interest? Like and so the way, there are lots of different definitions of impact investing, but today I'm going to use the one that our colleagues at Wharton use, which is a financial investment with an intent to create a social impact. That's the intended goal of it. And we do have resources on our website around that. We have a whole module at the Academy, High Impact Philanthropy Academy, called Aligning Capital for Impact. And our colleagues at Wharton have various initiatives on impact investing. There's a whole center with resources. One of the leading faculty in the ESG Center who focuses on impact investing, named Tyler Rye, actually teaches in our academy. So we are lucky in that we have such great colleagues who are focused on that. And it's just, you know, a lot of people, especially I'd say younger people who come to our academy, they really are thinking about how they use all their money to make the world a better place. Gifts and grants. They're thinking about, well, how do I spend my money? Where do I get my food, buy my clothes, right? Is it aligned with my values and my philanthropic concerns? And then they also look at where I'm investing. So that's, that's one. Ooh, and I see, oh, so happy to, hi Hannah, an alumna of the center's team when she was a grad student. I see has a question.
And then the Catalyst Fund team supporting us with our strategy. So double
Yes,
with
yes.
Hannah. So Hannah's question is, how do we think about if you should join a giving circle versus start your own giving circle? And do we have any thoughts or advice on that?
Yeah.
So I think I can start with this. So one of the resources that's out there is a giving circle directory that Philanthropy Together and Grapevine collaborate on to put there. And so one of the first reasons you can realize if you should start your own giving circle is if the geography, cause area, or population that you're trying to organize around doesn't exist, right? We had a donor who came to a webinar that we put on giving circles and just couldn't find one in his geography. And so this is a case of be the change that you want to be, right? And go ahead and start rallying. And A resource like Grapevine, which is an online platform where you can start and run your own giving circle, it's free to use, is terrific because you can just get it up and running right away. Philanthropy Together offers free, they're called Launchpad programs, where you can get a little bit of training on how to launch your own giving circle so you don't have to feel like you have to do it alone. And so the biggest one would be if you just see that that need isn't met. But for a lot of folks, they do like to start to join one so they can get a little taste of it. And maybe then go create another one. Like I mentioned, I'm in 4, which I'm always been a bit of an overachiever, but you can certainly do more than one. You can start one and you could be a part of one.
Yeah. No, I think that's the answer, what Tony gave. And because of resources like Grapevine and Philanthropy Together, they have contributed to the growth of collective giving and giving circles because they've made it easier to both find ones already active and aligned with what you care about, as well as start ones when, as Tony said, you see a need that is not yet met by an existing giving circle.
Well, great. So that brings us to all of the questions that I can see that we've had today, and really appreciate you digging into the toolkit so that everyone listening can get a preview, and now that they're able to go in deeper and read it on their own. So I'm going to see, Kat, if you have any final remarks. If not, we'll give it over to Kelly to close us out.
Yeah, no, just thank you, Tony. Always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you for Fidelity Charitable's Catalyst Fund support. And for all of you who joined, thank you for joining us and use the toolkit. It is meant for you to help you make the bigger difference in the world you want to make. So thank you.